I have 2 daughters, Maren and Camille. I also have another one named Sienna who isn't my daughter, but I see her as family. My husband Paul doesn't like her and says I chose wrong. I'm the one still inviting Sienna over for dinner. And yes, I know what happened when they were teenagers. I knew then, I know now. I just don't treat it like a lifelong disability the way Maren does. I remember that year clearly. Maren was 15, quiet kid. Always had that look like she was bracing for something even when nothing was happening. She started seeing that boy, Victor. I liked him fine, polite. His mother came to church sometimes. It wasn't some scandal, teenager state. When the cheating happened, Maren came home pale and shaking. She told me he'd slept with Sienna. She used the word betrayed like she was 40 and divorcing. I didn't dismiss her. I told her I was sorry. I told her boys that age are idiots. That didn't mean she was worthless. She cried in the kitchen for hours. Paul sat with her longer than I did. I had dinner burning. The bullying. Yes, it happened. I heard the whispers at school events. I saw Sienna's little circle of girls freeze when Maren walked by. Maren stopped wanting to go to family Sundays because Victor was cousins with Camille's friends. She shut her bedroom door more. She asked to transfer schools. We let her. That's the part nobody seems to remember. We didn't force her to tough it out. We filled out paperwork. We drove her across town every morning her last year. Paul would circle the block until she went inside because she was scared to walk in alone. We did what parents do. But even then I thought, and I didn't say this out loud because you can't say this to a 15-year-old, I thought she was sinking too deep into something temporary. Girls get mean in high school. Boys cheat. It's ugly. It's embarrassing. It hurts. But it's not fatal. It's not a permanent mark. Maren treated it like a death. She refused to visit my sister anymore because Victor might be there. She wouldn't attend Camille's college send-off party because Sienna might show up. She stopped speaking about that entire friend group as if they were contagious. If Paul or I mentioned their names, she'd leave the room. I figured she'd grow out of it. People do. Camille did. Camille has always been practical. If someone crosses her, she calculates and adjusts. She doesn't bleed on about it for a decade. I'm not blind. Maren has always been softer, even as a child. If Camille scraped her knee, she'd rinse it and keep playing. If Maren scraped hers, she'd sit on the steps and stare at it like the world had personally insulted her. I don't say that to be cruel. It's just how they are built. Years passed. Maren met her husband, had her baby, and built her own life. She didn't mention Sienna. She didn't mention Victor. I thought that chapter had finally folded shut. Then Evan walked into my kitchen one evening and said he'd met someone. He was 18, just finished school. That restless age where they think they're invincible. He said her name, and I did recognize it immediately. Sienna. I didn't react the way Paul did. Paul went stiff. I saw it. He looked at me like we were back in that kitchen 10 years ago with Maren crying into a dish towel. I asked Evan how old she was. He said 25. I did the math. 7 years, not nothing, but not some crime. He was legally an adult, working, paying for his own car insurance. Paul said it wasn't appropriate. I asked him if we were going to pretend 18-year-old boys don't chase older women on purpose. Evan looked proud, not manipulated, not confused, proud, like he'd won something. Sienna came over the next week. I studied her the moment she walked in. People expect me to say she smirked or acted smug. She didn't. She was composed. She brought flowers. She complimented the house. She asked about my arthritis like she'd been briefed. Did I trust her? No. But I also didn't see a villain. I saw a woman who'd grown out of being a cruel teenager. Maren came by that Sunday for coffee and saw Sienna's car outside. She froze on the driveway like she'd seen a ghost. I hadn't warned her. I didn't think I had to. She walked in, and when she saw Sienna sitting at my table, I could feel the air change. Sienna stood up, said hello, calm, no sarcasm. Maren didn't greet her back. She looked at me instead. Not confused, not shocked, accusing. After Sienna left, Maren unloaded, said I had no idea what that girl did to her. I reminded her I did know. I lived through it too. She said I never believed how bad it was. That stung because it's not true. I believed her. I just never believed it should define her entire adulthood. She said I was choosing her bully over my own daughter. That's where I lose patience. This isn't high school anymore. Evan is involved now. Camille supports the relationship. Camille thinks Sienna is good for him, steadies him, keeps him focused. Camille also isn't sentimental about teenage grudges. Paul sided with Maren immediately, said we were inviting poison back into the family. I asked him if he thought our grandson was stupid. We fought about it after Maren left. He said I was minimizing what happened. I said he was exaggerating it. He said an 18-year-old has no business with a 25-year-old woman. I said if Sienna were a man, nobody would blink. He didn't like that. I am not naive about power differences. But I also don't believe women become predators at 25 by default. Evan pursued her. He told me that plainly. He likes that she's older, that she has her own place, that she doesn't play games. And here's the part nobody wants to say out loud. Sienna didn't come from stability. Her mother died. Her father drifted. She's been working since she was 16. I have eyes. I see the way she watches a room before sitting down. That's not entitlement. That's survival. Maren says Sienna brainwashes people. I don't see that. I see someone who adapts well. Yes, she hurt my daughter at 15. 15-year-olds are cruel. I was cruel at 15. Paul was cruel at 15. We survived. What I cannot keep indulging is the idea that because Maren suffered once, the rest of the family must orbit that wound forever. When Sienna started coming around regularly, Camille offered to let Evan move into the apartment above her house instead of renting somewhere else. It made sense financially. He's young. Why waste money? Sienna moved in quickly. That part I understand bothers people. 2 months isn't long. But they're adults. I'm not their parole officer. Maren was living in that upstairs unit at the time, saving for her own house. Camille built it years ago when Maren and her husband were struggling to get ahead. It was generous. Camille didn't have to do that. Now this is where everything tilted. Camille decided it would be better for Evan and Sienna to have the space. She told Maren they had a couple of months to figure something else out. Maren took it as eviction. Camille took it as practical rearranging. When Maren called me crying about it, I didn't panic. I asked her what her plan was. She and her husband both work. They aren't helpless. They managed to find a place. Yes, it was stressful. Yes, they sold a car. Yes, they took on more hours. Life is stressful. Paul said we were pushing her out for the girl who tormented her. I said we were adjusting living arrangements for the people currently building their future. Maren stopped coming by. She blocked Camille, then she blocked me. Paul didn't. He started sleeping on the couch some nights, said he didn't recognize me. That I'd hardened. Maybe I have. Or maybe I just don't romanticize pain the way he does. Last month at dinner, he said something in front of Evan that crossed a line. He implied Sienna preyed on him. Evan stood up so fast his chair scraped the tile, said he wasn't a victim. I watched that exchange carefully. Evan didn't look controlled. He looked insulted. And that's when I realized this isn't about the past anymore. It's about whether we treat an 18-year-old man like a child because his aunt can't move on. Paul told me later I was abandoning our daughter all over again. I told him I refused to keep punishing someone for what they did at 15. He said it wasn't punishment, it was loyalty. And I said loyalty doesn't mean freezing time. A week after that argument, Camille told Maren formally that the apartment would need to be empty by the end of the summer. She wanted to renovate it slightly for Evan and Sienna before fall. Maren didn't speak during that conversation, Camille said. She just stared at her like she was a stranger. That same evening, Maren called me. Her voice wasn't loud. That almost made it worse. She asked me if I was going to say anything, if I were going to stand up for her, and I told her no. Not because I enjoy hurting her, not because I forgot that year. I said no because she is 26 years old, married, with a child, and she was asking me to step into a housing decision between two adults like we were still dividing bedrooms between sisters. She went quiet. I could hear her breathing. Then she said, very measured, that she hoped I never needed her the way she needed me now. That sentence sat with me longer than the crying ever did. She moved out within 6 weeks. I drove past the house one afternoon and saw her husband loading the last of the boxes into a rented truck. Maren wasn't outside. She didn't look up at my window. Camille supervised contractors the next morning. Paint samples, new flooring, small upgrades. She likes things orderly. Paul refused to go near the place during that time. He said it made him sick. Evan and Sienna moved in without ceremony. They carried their own furniture up the stairs. I watched from the yard. No fanfare, no celebration. It was just another adjustment. The first real fracture happened at Sunday dinner 2 weeks later. I had made roast chicken. Evan brought wine. Sienna set the table without being asked. She is attentive. I won't pretend she isn't. Paul barely looked at her. He spoke to Evan but avoided her name. That kind of pointed omission is deliberate. Halfway through dinner, Paul said he had spoken to Maren. Sienna kept eating. Evan stiffened. Paul said Maren felt pushed out. Said she felt replaced. I said she chose to interpret it that way. Paul said, you could have told Camille to wait. I said, and for how long? He didn't answer that directly. He went back to the age. Said 18 is still a boy. Said 25 are experienced. Said power doesn't vanish because someone turns 18. Sienna finally looked up and said calmly that she wasn't controlling anyone. She works. She pays her share. She didn't drag Evan anywhere. Paul told her it wasn't her place to speak about family history. Evan slammed his hand on the table. Not violent, but sharp enough that the glasses rattled. He said if anyone was disrespecting family, it was us for acting like he couldn't make his own choices. That night, Paul slept in the guest room. He started calling Maren more often. I could hear his voice through the door sometimes. Softer than it had been in years. He'd hang up and look at me like I'd betrayed something sacred. He said I never understood how much that year scarred her. I reminded him that I drove her to a new school every day for months, that I fielded calls from guidance counselors, that I stayed up late when she wouldn't eat. He said compassion doesn't expire. I said adulthood doesn't pause. Maren's name became a trigger word in the house. If I brought her up neutrally, Paul would tense. If he brought her up, it came loaded. 3 months in, Sienna started coming over without Evan sometimes. Not often, once or twice a week. She'd sit at the counter while I prepped dinner, ask about recipes, talk about shifts at work. She never mentioned the past, never brought up high school. She doesn't perform guiltily. I asked her directly one afternoon if she remembered how things were with Maren back then. She said yes. I asked if she regretted it. She shrugged once, said she was 15, said she wanted attention, said she didn't think about consequences. Then she said she doesn't recognize that girl anymore. There was no trembling confession, no tears, just acknowledgement. That's enough for me. Paul found out she'd been coming by alone and accused me of encouraging proximity, as if I'm grooming her into sainthood. He said I should demand an apology to Maren before accepting her into this family. I asked him what good a forced apology does after 10 years. He said it shows loyalty. I told him loyalty isn't theater. The real blow came at Christmas. Maren and her husband showed up late. They stood near the doorway like guests instead of daughters. Camille hugged them. Evan waved. Sienna offered a small nod. It was tight but civil. Paul made a toast before dessert. He said he hoped the new year would bring clarity and healing where there had been division. He looked directly at Maren when he said it. Maren started crying before he finished. Not loud, just steady tears. Her husband put his arm around her. The room froze. She said she couldn't pretend anymore, that sitting across from Sienna felt like being 15 again, that every time she walked into a room where Sienna was welcomed, it told her she mattered less. I waited for Sienna to respond. She didn't. Evan did. He said this wasn't about high school anymore, that Maren was making his relationship into a punishment. Maren said she didn't want punishment. She wanted acknowledgement that what happened was wrong. Camille cut in and said it was wrong. That doesn't mean it dictates everyone's future. Paul stood up and told Camille she had displaced her own sister for convenience. That's when Camille lost patience. She said she offered Maren stability for years and got resentment in return. She said she wasn't obligated to subsidize comfort indefinitely. The word obligated hung in the air. Maren grabbed her coat. She didn't scream. She didn't insult anyone. She just said she couldn't keep doing this and walked out. Her husband followed. Paul followed them outside. I stayed at the table. When Paul came back in, he said he was done pretending everything was fine. I told him nothing is ever fine, it's managed. He said that's the problem. He started spending weekends at Maren's new house after that, fixing shelves, babysitting, being visible. He wanted her to know she wasn't alone. I didn't stop him, but I didn't shift either. I won't rewrite history into something more dramatic than it was. Maren was hurt deeply as a teenager. I believe that. I just don't believe permanent exile is the solution. People keep asking if I worry about the age gap. I've watched them closely. Evan isn't isolated. He still sees friends. He still works. He argues with Sienna openly. There's no fear in him, no shrinking. If that changes, I'll step in. Until then, I refuse to treat a legal adult like a hostage. Last week, Paul told me he's considering moving out for a while. Said he doesn't recognize the woman who can sit across from the person who humiliated her daughter and offer her coffee. I told him I can hold two truths at once, that Sienna was cruel and that she isn't required to be cruel forever. He said some damage deserves distance. I said distance already happened, 10 years of it. What he wants is symbolic justice. What Maren wants is a family that mirrors her pain back to her so she feels validated. What I want is a household that functions. Those priorities don't line up. Paul asked me quietly if I would choose this stance over my marriage. I didn't answer immediately, because the truth is I don't see it as choosing Sienna over anyone. I see it as refusing to let one chapter decide every room we sit in. If that costs me something, I'll absorb it. I've absorbed worse, and I'm not changing my position. Follow-up. I said I could hold two truths at once. That didn't age well. Camille found out about the cheating by accident, not some dramatic scene. She was upstairs because the contractor had to remeasure the balcony railing. Evan was out with his friends. Sienna thought the house was empty. Camille heard a man's voice in the bedroom. Not Evan's. She didn't burst in screaming. That's not her. She stood in the hallway long enough to hear enough, laughing. A comment about free rent while it lasts. That's the part Camille repeated to me later, flat, like she was reading off a grocery list. She knocked. Silence, shuffling. A door opening. Sienna stepped out composed. The man was still inside. Camille didn't yell. She asked one question. Does Evan know? Sienna said no. Camille told the man to leave. He did. No scene. Just fast steps down the stairs and out the front door. When Evan got home that evening, Camille was waiting downstairs. She told him directly. No cushioning, no guessing. I was there because Camille called me before she told him. She said, "You should hear this in person." Evan didn't believe it at first. Then he went upstairs and talked to Sienna. I won't describe his face in detail because it's still hard to look at. He didn't yell either. That's what surprised me. He asked Sienna if it was true. She admitted it. Said it wasn't serious. Said she felt trapped. Said he was young and she needed someone who understood her better. He sat down on the edge of the bed and just stared at the floor. That's when everything split open. Camille told Sienna she needed to pack her things and leave within the week. Sienna crossed her arms and said she lived there. Camille said it was her property. Sienna said she had established residency. That was the first time I heard that word come out of her mouth. Residency. She said she'd been receiving mail there for months. She had bank statements with the address. She contributed to utilities through transfers. She had tenant rights. Camille laughed at first. Wrong move. Sienna said in our state, once someone lives somewhere for a certain number of days and receives mail, you can't just kick them out. You need formal eviction. She said if Camille locked her out, she could call the police for unlawful eviction. She said the word unlawful twice. Camille told her to stop talking like a paralegal and start packing. Sienna pulled out her phone and said she would document everything. I watched this happen from the doorway. I kept thinking this is escalating too fast. This isn't supposed to look like this. She was supposed to be ashamed. She wasn't ashamed. She said calmly that she never signed a lease, but that didn't matter. She lived there long enough to establish tenancy. She paid towards groceries. She had proof of bank transfers labeled utilities. Camille asked Evan if he'd given her keys. He nodded. Camille asked if there was any written agreement about rent. He shook his head. Sienna said she had texts from Camille welcoming her to your new home. That phrase. Camille did send that text months ago. We all stood there in silence for a second, recalculating. Camille told her she had 30 days. Sienna said she would leave when legally required. I drove home that night with a headache that felt like pressure behind my eyes. I kept replaying all the times I defended her. All the times I said she wasn't that girl anymore. Paul was in the living room when I walked in. I told him. He didn't look surprised. That irritated me more than anything. He said, "You see it now." I didn't answer that. The next morning, Camille was on the phone with an attorney. Not a dramatic one, just a property lawyer she'd used before. He confirmed what Sienna implied. Even without a lease, if someone can prove residency and contributions, you can't just remove them. You have to serve a formal notice to quit. Then wait. Then file eviction if they refuse. Minimum timeline, 30 days. Possibly longer if contested. If Sienna claimed retaliation or harassment, it could drag. Camille looked sick when she explained it to me. She hates losing control of her own property. Evan barely left his room for 2 days. He didn't defend Sienna anymore. He also didn't scream at her. He seemed embarrassed more than furious. That's worse. He stopped answering friends' messages. He called in sick to work once. I tried speaking to him privately. He said he felt stupid. Said everyone warned him in subtle ways and he ignored it. He said he thought he was special. I told him heartbreak doesn't make you stupid. He didn't look convinced. Meanwhile, Sienna stayed upstairs like nothing was happening. She continued cooking, continued using the laundry. She stopped bringing other men over, obviously, but she didn't act like someone about to be displaced. Camille drafted a formal notice with the attorney's guidance, 30-day notice to vacate due to termination of informal tenancy. It had dates, property addresses, and signature lines. Very clinical. Sienna accepted it, didn't argue, just said, "I'll review this." That same afternoon, Camille found out something else. Sienna had forwarded some of her mail to that address months ago, not just packages, credit card statements, insurance paperwork. That makes documentation stronger. The attorney said if Sienna chose to contest eviction in court, she could request a hearing. That would extend her stay. If she claimed she'd been paying rent, even partially, that complicates it. Camille asked me if I'd ever noticed bank transfers labeled rent. I hadn't, but Evan admitted he'd sent her money occasionally when she was short. He didn't label it anything specific, just amounts. Ambiguity helps the wrong person. Paul told me this was karma. I snapped at him. That wasn't productive. He said I had been blind because I wanted peace more than truth. I said now is not the time to weaponize hindsight. While this was unfolding, I made a decision about my marriage. Paul and I had been circling separation talk quietly for weeks before this happened. Not formally. Just that cold edge in conversations. I told him if we were going to survive this, we needed to stop using it as a referendum on who was right 10 years ago. He said this situation proves something fundamental about judgment. I said Camille's property dispute is not our divorce trial. He said if I couldn't admit I misjudged Sienna, he didn't know what else I was minimizing. That hurt. Because I wasn't minimizing now, I was staring directly at it. But here's the part nobody expects. I didn't run to Marin. Camille suggested maybe Marin would feel vindicated enough to soften. That if Marin saw Sienna exposed, maybe she'd re-enter the family fold. I called Marin. I told her what happened. There was a pause. Not satisfaction, not gloating, just quiet. She said she was sorry for Evan. That was it. I asked if she would come by, support her nephew, be present. She said she wasn't interested in being part of the fallout. That she'd already lived her version of it. She hoped Evan would learn from it. But she wasn't stepping back into that house. I told her this was different. This wasn't high school. She said it was the same pattern. Then she said something that unsettled me more than anger would have. You defended her when she humiliated me. You can handle this without me. Paul overheard part of that conversation. He said I shouldn't expect Marin to rush in and clean up a mess she warned us about. I said this isn't about cleaning up. It's about family solidarity. He said solidarity doesn't activate only when convenient. We haven't shared a bed in 3 nights. Camille is proceeding with eviction filing if Sienna doesn't vacate voluntarily. The attorney explained that if she stays past the notice period, we file an unlawful detainer. Court date, service papers. If she claims retaliation for reporting harassment or alleges unsafe conditions, it could delay removal. Sienna has already started documenting minor issues. A loose cabinet hinge. A cracked tile. She sent Camille a message listing them. That wasn't accidental. Evan saw that message and looked physically ill. Yesterday, he told Sienna he wanted her gone immediately. She told him calmly that emotional decisions don't override tenant law. He asked her why she was doing this. She said she needs time to secure new housing and she has rights. Camille asked me if we should offer cash for keys, pay her to leave sooner. The attorney said that's common. Offer a lump sum in exchange for voluntary vacating and a signed agreement waiving future claims. Camille hates the idea. Paying the person who cheated on her son to leave her own property. I told her to consider it. Quiet resolution might be cheaper than court. Paul heard that and said I was still protecting Sienna. I'm not protecting her. I'm protecting my marriage. And that's the line I finally drew. I told Camille that if this turns into court, public records, and dragged timelines, I am stepping back. I will not sit in hearings. I will not testify about character. I am done being the bridge between everyone. She looked at me like I'd abandoned her. I told her she has resources, she has counsel, she can handle her own property dispute. What I didn't say is that I can feel my life narrowing. If Paul leaves over this, I lose more than pride. Camille served the formal notice 3 days ago. Sienna responded in writing. She said she disputes termination on grounds of retaliatory eviction and intends to remain until due process concludes. Evan read that letter and punched the wall. And tonight, Camille called me again because Sienna filed something. Not a full lawsuit, not yet, but she went to the courthouse and submitted a written response to the notice. The attorney warned Camille she might do it. Once that happens, it locks everything into process. Camille read the paperwork over speaker while I stood in her kitchen. Sienna claimed she had been contributing financially to the household, claimed she had an implied month-to-month tenancy, claimed the eviction notice was retaliatory and emotionally motivated after relationship conflict. She used that phrase exactly. She also checked a box requesting a hearing, which means no immediate removal. It means dates. It means waiting. It means official documentation that now exists in the public record. Camille kept repeating, "This is my house." The attorney explained that ownership doesn't override procedure. If Camille changes locks, removes belongings, or shuts off utilities, Sienna could call law enforcement and claim unlawful eviction. That would not go well. So now we wait. Evan hasn't gone back upstairs since the filing. He's sleeping on Camille's couch. He won't look at Sienna. He avoids the staircase like it's contaminated. Yesterday he said to me, "I thought she loved me." I didn't answer immediately. I chose my words carefully. I said sometimes people love what something gives them. He nodded once. No tears. Just that same hollow look. Camille offered Sienna $5,000 to vacate within 10 days and sign a release agreement. The attorney drafted it. It included language about surrendering possession, waiving claims, and confirming no further financial disputes. Sienna declined. She said $5,000 wasn't enough to relocate securely. She said she needed at least $12,000 to cover deposits, moving costs, and lost work time. $12,000. Camille called it extortion. The attorney called it negotiation. Paul called it a consequence. I called it expensive clarity. Marin still refuses involvement. I tried once more. I told her Evan is unraveling. I told her maybe seeing her aunt show up would matter. She said she feels bad for him. She does not feel obligated to participate in a spectacle. She said when she was unraveling at 15, nobody demanded apologies from the person who hurt her. She had to leave quietly. That part isn't fair. We did help her. But I understand why she feels that way. Paul has shifted from angry to almost vindicated calm. That scares me more. He's been staying 2 nights a week at Marin's house. He says it gives him perspective. Last night, he told me he's meeting with a financial advisor about separating assets, just in case. I asked, just in case. He said, in case we decide we're not aligned anymore. Aligned. That's the word we use when we're pretending this is strategic instead of emotional. I told him I'm not choosing Sienna over him. He said that wasn't the choice. The choice was empathy. I said I do have empathy. I just don't weaponize it. He shook his head. Meanwhile, Sienna has begun sending Camille formal written communication only. Emails, polite tone, refers to herself as tenant. References statute number she clearly looked up. Implied warranty of habitability, protection from retaliatory eviction under state law, requests for repair of ongoing maintenance concerns. One of those concerns was the cracked tile she pointed out. Another was inadequate privacy due to frequent unannounced entries. Camille hasn't entered without notice, but she did knock that first day without warning. That detail is now part of Sienna's narrative. The attorney says documentation works both ways. Keep everything clean, no emotional texts, no raised voices captured on video, serve notices properly. Maintain utilities, offer settlement in writing. This is no longer about betrayal. It's about procedure. Evan finally confronted Sienna face-to-face 3 days ago. I was downstairs when it happened. I heard his voice but not every word. He asked why she couldn't just leave. She said because she doesn't trust them to give her time fairly. He said she destroyed trust first. She said relationships end all the time. He said she used him. She didn't deny that directly. She said she needed stability, and he offered it willingly. That sentence broke something in him. I heard it in the silence after. Later, he told me he feels like he volunteered to be manipulated. I told him he made choices in good faith. That matters. He said good faith doesn't protect you from being embarrassed. Camille is livid but controlled. She has stopped speaking about Sienna in emotional terms. She refers to her as the tenant. That's how she's coping. We had another conversation about paying her off. The attorney said $12,000 might be cheaper than months of court and potential attorney fees if Sienna contests aggressively. If she claims retaliation or harassment, even if unfounded, it prolongs everything. Camille asked me if I thought Sienna would escalate further. I said yes, because now Sienna has leverage, and she knows it. Paul overheard that and said this is exactly what happens when you mistake adaptability for integrity. I didn't argue. I don't have the energy. My marriage is thinner now than it's ever been. Not explosive, just stretched. Paul asked me yesterday if I regret defending Sienna. I said I regret underestimating her. That's not the same thing. He asked if I would apologize to Marin. I said, for what, specifically? He said it was for dismissing her fear when she said Sienna manipulates. I said I dismissed the idea that a 15-year-old's cruelty guaranteed adult predation. That was my position. He said sometimes patterns persist. I said sometimes people grow. He asked if I still believe that. I didn't answer. Tonight Camille called because Sienna sent another email. This one is requesting formal repair of the cabinet hinge within 7 days under tenant maintenance rights. If not addressed, she suggested she might pursue remedies under state housing code. It's petty. It's strategic. It's legal. Camille asked me if I would testify, if needed, that Sienna's occupancy was conditional and familial, not commercial. I told her no. She stared at me. I said I am not stepping into court over this. I am not risking my marriage to prove a point about tenancy classification. She said I'm abandoning her. I said I'm protecting what's left of my life. That's the part nobody likes about me. I choose stability, even now. Evan heard that exchange. He didn't say anything, but he looked at me differently, not hostile, just aware. I don't know if that awareness is respect or disappointment. Sienna remains upstairs. Notice period ends in 12 days. Hearing date pending. Paul leaves tomorrow to stay with Marin for the weekend. And I am standing in the middle of a house that feels legally complicated, morally messy, and personally fragile. I defended a woman I thought had matured. Now I'm watching statutes protect her from consequences. And the only person who refuses to participate in the chaos is the daughter I once told to move on. I still don't think suffering should dictate the rest of a life. But I am starting to understand that dismissal has a cost. I'm just not sure yet which bill is mine.